So I hop on a call with one of my closest childhood friends, and she tells me about this experience she has when she goes to the doctor. At this point, she's misdiagnosed 3 times, in which she's crying in the middle of the night. Ambulance comes to her house. They bring her to the doctors, and they accuse her of wanting drugs. Now, this is someone that's studying her doctorate in pharmacology. Her twin sister is in medical school. And so when they're like accusing her wanting drugs, she's like breaking down. So she calls her twin sister. And once the doctor realizes, hey, he's talking to a doctor, they switch. Like their whole demeanor, everything switches, and they apologize. And that really pissed me off.
Happy 2025 and welcome to episode 12 of Stories with Shomik. Today's guest is the founder of Melanin. Normally, this is the point where I introduce the company, but Yvonne, you wrote something on LinkedIn that stuck with me, where you said, I continue to build Melanin so my future children won't fear hospitals.
Yeah.
And I'm usually scrolling on LinkedIn and I stopped to read the rest of it because I was like, whoa, what does that mean? So I think you should tell us what Melanin is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for stopping by the post. I appreciate that. Melanin is a telehealth platform. It's designed to reduce the rate of misdiagnosis for women of color and really improve their consult experience. So what we try to do is help all women be the best advocate they can be when they go to the doctors. And that really started because of a really poor experience a good friend of mine had. But it continues because I have my own fears. I would like for my children not to have these same fears. And I'd like to someday go into a hospital and feel very safe.
Before we get more into Melanin, would love to know about your story. Tell us about your childhood. You can start from the beginning if you want. Your top 3 highlights, whatever you feel like.
Wow, top 3 highlights. That's funny. I don't know if I have top 3 highlights for life. Maybe I'll have to sit down and that could be a new LinkedIn post. But if I had to think,
this is a very introspective podcast. We only ask the tough questions here.
Exactly. I am a Nigerian woman born and raised in Canada. Both my parents are from the same tribe, but actually met in a doctor's office here in Toronto.
No way.
Yeah, it's actually very, very corny of them. Like they're just like, yeah, they're cute in their own little way. But I'm the oldest of 4, and was very much. I mean, I try to think about it as Canadian at that time in life. The career paths of success for an immigrant was very clear, and it's usually doctor, lawyer, engineer. Now, just because of culture, I wasn't primed to be an engineer, which I always told my parents they messed up because they should have pushed me down that route. But I was primed to be a doctor, and so I, went through all of schooling knowing that's what I was going to do. At first, I thought I would go into like sports medicine at one point in life, and went to Carleton University for my undergrad. And I got in for chemistry, but switched to neuroscience and mental health. And so that's kind of where the start process is.
I see.
I really went based off of my curiosities and just led through that path.
I grew up in India, and for the most part, even for my generation, it was the same thing. Like if you're going to be, you got to be an engineer, lawyer, doctor. That was the general sentiment. My parents were more follow your passion, and like an idiot, I ended up in sales. I wish there was more of a push to be an engineer, because when I look at the kind of money these engineers make here in Canada, I'm like, maybe I should have followed the traditional path. So much for following my passion, which is to talk. And what made you switch from chemistry to
neuroscience?
Yeah.
Well, I went into chemistry because I was good at it. It's not because I loved it, or I loved my teacher at the time in high school, and I just really was good at it. I didn't have to think about it. I just came naturally. But the profs in first year, they do this thing where they try to like weasel out the weak. So the first class day is like maybe 900 people, and they're like, hey, who wants to be a doctor? Everyone raises their hand. By the end of the class, there's like a handful of people that are still raising their hand. It's like a gripping feeling that you have. And I was like, well, he might have stolen the joy in this chemistry course. So let me see other stuff. And so I just did different science electives. And
do you think this professor is responsible for the healthcare system collapsing in Canada now?
It might be a tactic. It might be a tactic. I don't know. But I always give people a little bit of kudos because you need to have that same grit to kind of
Mhm.
go through medical school,
Absolutely.
which questionable if that's how we should be doing it because you're seeing a lot of burnout for practitioners, but that's another conversation. But yeah, that's the mindset that people have. It's like, type A personality, that's how we go through this whole process. And I did this random elective at the time, and the prof had 5 brains in a jar, and I was sold, essentially. I know that sounds strange. It might sound,
Interesting.
but for me, I just kept thinking the science behind having these 5 brains in a jar. What could that look like? Something that we use like every day. It's one of the most important organs in our body. It just sparked my interest.
Very cool. Very cool. So you finish school, and then I see you're in the healthcare space, but you are also a partnerships person like I am.
Yeah,
In fact, I think that's how we got connected the first time.
absolutely. Absolutely.
How did you end up in partnerships of all the places you could have been?
That's interesting. Um, I don't think there was a word for partnerships back in the day, but I feel like I've always kind
Right.
of done it. Like I've done it in different spaces. I would say like my first full-time job was working at United Nations Association in Canada, and that actually opened the doors for like entrepreneurship and kind of what the tech space could be like. And so after that, I started going into working fintech for a few years. I was still working in healthcare at the same time, but working in fintech for a few years. And then I was working traditional sales. And I was seeing what traditional sales was doing, and I'm like, this isn't really my thing. And the ways in which that have worked for me before is this new route called partnerships. And so when I saw a job posting with the title, and I was like, oh, what does this title mean? So I started searching the title, and they're like, oh, I've been doing this for how many years? So let me just explore there. And then I did a course, started learning a little bit more about it, and then switched to partnerships. Still in fintech, funny enough, but yeah.
Right. Right. That's actually also for context, like this conversation will play out exactly the way things go in my brain, which means there is very little structure as the conversation unfolds. I get curious and we keep deep diving into things that weren't necessarily originally part of the plan. Because I find like a lot of people want to now be in partnerships, and what they effectively want to do is be client facing and capture a little bit of upside of the sales, but they don't want to be on commission every
Yeah.
month or every quarter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I usually don't know how to respond to them when they tell
Mhm.
me, "Oh no, it's I don't want the risk of taking on commission, which my entire career I've been able to pay, and I've loved every minute of it."
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, how would you tackle a question like that? This episode is about me learning things that I can pass off as my own uh, insights later.
Okay, I love that. Honestly, if someone asked me, I would probably tell them take like 6 months. If you think 6 months is too long, start at 3 and do the gruesome job of cold calling. Like, start there. I know it sucks. It may feel like, oh, I'm not getting the money I want. And it's honestly because social media, during the midst of the pandemic, there was this more conversation in regards to how much people make, which in one way is good because we start talking about transparency and people need to understand how to grow their money, how to learn, how to ask for the pay they want. But then it came to this like comparison theory. We're all comparing ourselves. And there is this fear of there's not fear, there's a difficulty in knowing that my finances are not secure in the stable paycheck every few weeks. And so if I go lean on commission, how can I be able to sustain that if I'm not good at it? So then my question is start getting good at it, start learning how to do it. And technology has made it 10 times easier than to do any of these before. You just have to kind of like challenge and push yourself. So there's that part of it where you honestly like start there. And then from a partnership side, you are better at building those relationships when you start small and slowly start to put yourself out there. Right. And that's a key part of being able to say, okay, now I know the tactics of cold calling and sales. I know the tactics of connecting with people. Let me merge that to upsell and cross sell and lean into what partnerships is about.
Love that. Love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I'm totally going to pass this off as my own insights. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But thank you for sharing that. So you've started working in partnerships. You are now you're a director of partnerships, so you clearly know what you're doing. What do you think has been lost my train of thought there? What do you think has helped you sort of distinguish yourself? Because there's a lot of people that get into partnerships and then eventually fall off to do other things. Like, what do you think has kept you going and has been your strength so far?
I honestly think it's mainly because I come back to the basics of people. Like, I think it's a little bit difficult because I'm one of those like social entrepreneurs, so I like to believe in what I'm selling. I know like a good salesperson, like I can sell anything, and that's great. I like to believe and be able to really say, well, why wouldn't you have this product if it could make your life easier? I could probably sell the what's it called, the otter, right? And with the fireflies notes because I use them so much and I absolutely love them. And so for me, it makes someone's life better. And so it's more about noting, okay, I go back to the fundamentals. Why am I doing this in the first place? And then I try to just connect with people to say, like, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing right now? And you'll either tell me, okay, it's about my organization. You'll tell me it's about you yourself and how you don't think you're at the right position or leadership wise. Or you'll talk about like the revenue, the business, the structure, how to actually get to the next stages. And in somewhere in that, it's either I have the answer now, I don't have the answer, but I can get it for you. And that's like nurture. Or I can connect you with someone else and I can build a long-standing relationship in that way. And so when I try to focus on people, that's one of the best ways to get there. I think in this economy, it makes it a little bit difficult because you have all these different incentives to push certain targets that you need to hit. You also have to be within an organization that's willing to pivot and that's willing to be creative and stay with the times in order to have a product worth that matches the market as well.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, this is meant to be an episode about Melanin, but I think this is also turning into a masterclass on partnerships. I really like that point that you bring up about finding the right balance between what is right for the customer and what is right for the company from a long-term perspective. And that's something I tell my team as well, is like, hey, look, you could sell this one solution this quarter and make a lot of money this quarter and then never have them respond back to you ever again. Or you sell a little bit this quarter, but give them what works for them. And then you have more of a long-term relationship that you can lean on.
Yeah. I was actually watching a movie last night, and one of the actors says this thing about you don't want to feel like you were got. You want to be sold something where it's like, oh my God, like I love this so much, I can't wait to go back and get another one. Not that you were there and you're like, oh my gosh, like this was horrible. Why did I buy this? I must have had like, it's horrible judgment at the moment. So things like that. You really want to be able to make sure you're building the relationship so the person feels like this was a great deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And in your time as a partnerships person, what has been the biggest surprise to you? Something you never saw coming?
Oh, biggest surprise. I think it's when I was starting in partnerships. I think it was when I was starting. I know there was a big shift of time for people going from sales to partnerships and trying to explore that. You started seeing more partnership programs coming up. But when I first started, I didn't understand the importance of data in how we do our work. And I had switched this manager who I thought was horrible at the time. And they really pushed this need for me to learn it. But it was such a strange thought for me. I'm like, this is just not what I do. This is like data analytics. And I think in that role, they were combining two roles in one. So it really should have been two separate. But it forced me to really start to understand how much time am I spending with my big partners and how am I quantifying who that big partner is. Is it someone that can give me a good one-off paycheck? Or is it someone that's consistent over time? How many times am I meeting with them? What's their month-to-month increases? Or like you start to really look at the numbers, and that was a big change for me personally because I started integrating like analytics into my day-to-day work. And so now I'm doing that with Melanin and I love it. It's like the thing to kind of like bring you back to the numbers and helps me realize you want to do things based on impact, but you don't know if it's actually having the impact you want if you're not seeing the numbers.
Right. That's a very valid point. Speaking of Melanin, this is where we bring the conversation back to your company. You were saying there was an incident that caused you to start thinking about this company and launch this company. Totally on you how comfortable you are sharing, but would love to know more about what was the trigger point with that particular incident versus, in general, there's a lot of incidents every day. Why that particular?
Yeah. Well, I was in my master's at University of Waterloo, and the whole course of the program is to start your business entrepreneurship. And I thought I was going to do something in mental health.
This was your MBET degree?
Yeah, this was MBET, yeah.
Okay.
So I thought I was going to do something in mental health because I just finished an undergrad degree in mental health. And the time we were in the middle of the pandemic, I was doing like small different initiatives to help people with their mental health, and it was very overwhelming, to say the least. It's like you're living in the midst of the whole globe going through a mental health crisis as you try to do something with mental health, which is just like a lot on your own mental health. And second year, I decided that I was just going to go based off of the observations of people around me. So I hop on a call with one of my closest childhood friends, and she tells me about this experience she has when she goes to the doctor. At this point, she's gone like 6 times. She's misdiagnosed 3 times. And she's telling me about her most recent time in which, she's crying in the middle of the night. Ambulance comes to her house. They bring her to the doctors and they accuse her of wanting drugs. Now, for background, this is someone that's studying her pharmacology and doctorate in pharmacology. Her twin sister is in medical school. And so when they're like accusing her of wanting drugs, she's like breaking down me like, this is not what I want. I don't know what else to tell you to convince you. So she calls her twin sister. And once the doctor realizes, hey, he's talking to a doctor, they switch. Like their whole demeanor, everything switches, and they apologize. And that really pissed me off. It really annoyed me, to be honest. I just kept thinking like, she eventually got a diagnosis, one, because she had like the healthcare knowledge to push back. So when they would say certain things, she's like, well, this could increase my likelihood of getting diabetes, or this could lead to this. She also had connections, so she could call her family and say like, hey, this is what's happening. I don't know what to do. But she also had the personality and like the confidence to advocate for herself, which not everyone has.
Sure.
And I was just thinking like, what are my siblings going to do? What are my friends going to do? If this could happen to her, this could happen to anybody. Mm-hmm. I just spent the rest of that year doing research, like trying to understand, is this a one-off situation? How deep is this problem? And how often does this happen? And because in Canada, we don't collect healthcare data by race and ethnicity, we don't have the numbers. So you have to go based on stories. So I connected with over 250 patients at that time to truly understand. Yeah, it was start off with like a 10-minute call and lead into an hour. And in the last 20 minutes of the time, they'd be like, oh yeah, and this is when I got diagnosed with lupus. And I'm like, okay then. And then we spent another hour. And it was just like the most heart-wrenching conversation. At the end of the day, you usually have to take a break because it's like the most devastating points in people's lives. And they're walking through how all these things could have been avoided. And so I'm just seeing like patterns on top of each other. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to do something about it. Let's see where it goes. And I didn't know it was going to be a business. It's not like I knew I was doing a program, but I was like, I'm just going to focus on this problem right now because the problem is something that I'm really passionate about solving. And let's just see where it goes. And that's when I started exploring different opportunities to make it more sustainable.
Incredible. 250 patients.
Yeah. I think now it's 400, but then it took a lot for that year. I was just like all in the research phase for a very long time. I probably should have done a master's in science on top.
And how were you getting in touch with these patients?
That was honestly probably why it took so long, because it's not like someone goes on LinkedIn and says, this is like, I had a stroke last night and this is everything that happened.
Well, some people do.
Some people do.
And it's a business lesson out of it.
Exactly. But it's usually months after the fact. So you're then having to like search it, right?
For sure.
I started with like small groups, like small association groups. I found these small groups that were, they maybe help someone that's gone through cancer, or maybe they're out in the rural or the north and they're trying to navigate how to better manage their healthcare. So I'd start there and get a lot of referrals. Mm-hmm. And then I would go to like small events and say, I was too shy to really say what I was doing. And I did not have a name for Melanin at the time. I just said, hey, this is a problem that I'm interested in. If you know anybody. And I'm like, hey, I know someone. And then it kind of just went on a loop. And then it ended up taking months. But it worked out because I was able to get all the stories. And I had the stats from the US to back it. So what I would say is, I would say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I would say, do you know women are 30 times more likely to be misdiagnosed? I'd say, this is what I'm doing. Did you
30?
30 times. That stat for me always stands in my, and that's across disorders. That's like across heart disease, across cancer. Like when you think of like ADHD or depression, they're significantly more.
Why is that?
I genuinely think it's because we don't have enough knowledge on women's health in general. Women were only included in clinical studies in the US in 1993 and in Canada in 1997.
That's not even that long ago.
No, it's not. It's not at all. My sister was born in 1997. And I always think by the time the policy gets into place, it takes how many years before you actually have it in work?
Right.
And that's stage 3. So it's just going to take forever. So you're really starting to see like we're in the early stages of learning about women's health. And there's also incentives to learn about certain things more because it makes more money than others. Like we have a lot of research on certain disorders, but we have like very little on like polycystic ovary syndrome, and it's a growing disorder. And so it's like, okay, how do we increase the knowledge on these different disorders? Because also, as a media, for instance, when we think of someone that's going to have a heart attack, you think of someone that's clutching their chest, they're dropping down, they're folding their body. But a woman can just sit down there in a waiting room and be having a heart attack, and no one will know. Like you have to be able to pick up the signs, and we slowly started to learn things to pick up the signs, but we need way more research, way more funding, less bias to kind of get to learn more about it. Yeah.
So essentially what I'm hearing is there are groups that need to run marketing to drive more awareness, and some diseases are, for lack of a better word, sexier than others.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. Like mental health right now is very sexy, which is fantastic as someone that studied it, because I can think back to the history of hundreds of years of it not being sexy. And even when people think of mental health, they're not thinking of chronic depression. They're thinking of like general anxiety disorder. They're thinking of like seasonal depression. They're thinking of like general sadness. They're not thinking of bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. They're thinking of the disorders that everyday person can imagine.
Right.
They're not, which, they still have work to do. But yeah.
Huh. Interesting. And what made you come up with the name Melanin?
Honestly, I wish I could remember the story. I remember I was in Vancouver.
It's a great name. I'm just curious.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I remember sitting in Vancouver with my sister, going through different names. I remember the first version was Medical Melanin, which was taken when I was trying to buy the name. So that's the reason why I didn't go with it. And I was like, okay, well, Med Melanin. I wanted something that related to like people of color. And I kept thinking of like melanin. However, now that I work in healthcare more, I recognize that people think skincare when they think of melanin. So I was like, I didn't consider that. But these are like little things that I like thought, oh, okay, comes together. Someone's gonna resonate, and I knew a name needed to be like the first thing people saw when they thought of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it's a great name. It definitely rings, but that I was just curious, and it definitely sounds better than Medical Melanin. So. I think it's a good thing you didn't get that domain name.
Honestly, it's a very much like a word clincher when you have to put all the names together. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, like with all these AI tools that are out there, and like I use ChatGPT and Perplexity of more than I'd like to admit for a lot of things, and like sometimes I will type in, hey, what's the kind of, like it's usually health related. Like once I got a DEXA scan done, I put it into ChatGPT. It spat out a result. I took my blood work, put it in, and before I met with the doc, I already knew because it explained. And my favorite prompt is explain it to me like I'm 5.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was able to. That was the first time I went into a conversation with a doctor about my blood work, already knowing what I was going to hear. And I was more on the lookout if they say something different. Do you think tools like these are helpful for people of color or could go either way?
That's a good question. It is mixed, and it's very much dependent on the mission and the value of the company that is behind the tool that's being utilized. And I say that because, for instance, a lot of these AI models are not trained on data that is inclusive, right?
Right.
Like that's actually one of the biggest difficulties that I'm really exploring with Melanin is that it's not trained that way. I think I saw it with United Care in like 2019. They had an algorithm that disproportionately had people of color waiting longer in waiting rooms because of how the data that was infused. So you have like inaccurate data, and you have bias from engineers that are then putting all that data together. And so In one ways, yes, like this is revolutionary for healthcare. Healthcare is still very archaic. And I say that with a grain of salt. I say that we still have so much ways we need to go,
For sure.
particularly in Canada, because of all the barriers we put in place. We don't see as much of those innovations. You see a lot of innovations in other countries, and then you're trying to we have the talent, we have the research, like in Canada, 100%, but they leave from a commercialization innovation standpoint. So you see in that sense. But if I go back and think of like, how can, as a person of color, utilizing this technology, how can I make sure that's best suited for me? It's honestly just taking it with a grain of salt if it's not one of their mandates. Like if it's not one of their mandates, you're going to have probably a disproportionate impact. Like even ChatGPT and Claude AI and Perplexity, I love them. I use Claude AI like a lot, but they're not trained with healthcare data, right? Like they're not trained with the data that's going to specifically know, hey, if you're from this part of the world, the likelihood of you having sickle cell is this, the likelihood of you having fibroids is this. These are the considerations that need to be had. It's not going to take that into consideration.
Right. And is that the AI company's challenge, or is that just lack of research on people of color that exists in the first place?
Both. Because from the company standpoint, it has to be a priority. Like the data that they're using to train the models needs to be a priority. I saw this one, or listened to this one podcast where they're saying, oh, they're training all these models on YouTube now, like on YouTube conversations, things like that. And it's where you're getting the source information that's important. And if it's a priority, then you'll see that in the data that's shared. And then from the research side of it, there's a lot of hesitations. One, for us to share our data, for us to even be willing to do that in the first place, but to even extrapolate that data to find it. So that is kind of a mix. And that's where you have to find someone that's going to bridge the gap and close a little bit.
Interesting. And is that something you think at some point Melanin would do? Have its own trained
I'm actively thinking about it,
chatbot?
Honestly. It's definitely top of mind. I'm just kind of running to those same types of conversations in regards to how do you do this in a way that's inclusive, especially because if I wanted to create a model right now, I probably could, but it wouldn't be for the exact group of people that I'm dedicating it for. So then what's the point? So it's trying to find an effective avenue to still get it off the ground that prioritizes and supports the people that I am trying to support.
Very cool. Currently, Melanin's a team of 4 people?
We're 6 now.
6, okay.
6. But we're like, I would say I'm the only full-time. So there's like a lot of contractors, a lot of specialists, a lot of part-time, but we just kind of all balance it.
Okay. And what's the big picture vision for Melanin? Like if resources were not a constraint, everything worked out the way it was supposed to, what would it look like, say, 10 years from now?
10 years from now, we would either have gone through the route of supporting all women or all people of color. We would find some way to support men. And the reason why I say some way is because men don't like to go to the doctors and women make about 80% of healthcare decisions. So you just got to balance that a little bit differently. But in 10 years, it would be in...
So women make 80% of decisions for both?
Yeah.
Wow.
In heterosexual environments, 100%. Like, it's very much like, have you gone to the doctors? What are you doing? They'll book the appointments. It's a very traditional sense, but typically still happens to today. And then you're thinking of, like, they're taking care of children, taking care of this. Very traditional, but that is how it is.
80%, eh? That's a massive share.
Like, men don't like to go to the doctors.
Yeah, it's true. I'm not a fan. Not a fan. I don't love it.
They don't like going. And then also there's kind of like a vulnerability in talking about your healthcare. Like I can sit with a whole bunch of girls and we can transparently talk about our healthcare. You won't see that often with just a group of men. But if I have the same groups of men in the context with other women there, they will. So you're kind of seeing like that traditional sense play out to say, how can that look like? But it'd be nice to create a version of it for them in a way that makes sense. It wouldn't be the same tool for Melanin team because it would need to cater to different things. But it'd be great for it to be on everyone's phone. Yes. I'd love to connect and do partnerships with probably some like big players in 10 years where they're on the same mindset. So AI would be integrated, your focusing on inclusive care, but now we're focused on inclusive data and we're focusing on practitioners. The reason why I started focusing on the patients first is because I wanted the patients to feel the impact immediately. But I know for that sustainable long-term vision, you need to go into the institutions. And so going within those institutions to make the change so that, yes, we know bias exists, that's for sure. But how can we be able to immediately pinpoint, hey, like the tool we're using is not supporting this specific person. This is the biases you might see, different things like that. Focusing on the institutions would be great.
I love that. That's amazing. And, the thing you mentioned about men not talking about this stuff is actually the biggest pet peeve of mine is there's obviously a massive men's mental health crisis going on. And a lot of it is because we get together with our guy friends and we will talk about literally anything and everything except the things that matter.
Yeah.
It's something I feel very strongly about. I feel like this is a very fixable problem, and it requires one guy in the group to be just like, so tell us how you really feel.
Yeah.
And I keep doing that to my friends. I love doing it. And it's amazing the kind of stories that come out, which I was like, dude, I've known you 20 years. Like, how have we never
talked about this? It's
insane. So, yeah, hopefully, I think with every passing generation, I think guys are also starting to open up a lot more.
Absolutely.
And
also
social media is definitely helping. Yeah, I think social media has actually been on that one aspect is probably helping a little bit more. It could go either way. I mean, there's also the Andrew Tate line of thought, which is obviously horrible. But there is a small group that is slowly and steadily starting to sort of open this up. There's actually there's an Indian podcast called Be a Man Yaar, which effectively is like, come on, man, be a man. But it's all positive masculinity stories, and they have these celebrities come in who like are very vulnerable and will share their stories. So it's a small movement, but it's starting to get there, and hopefully we will eventually get there as well as the entirety of men. One thing that I've actually tell us about Melanin Mondays. I saw that on your LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on your LinkedIn.
Melanin Mondays. It's community webinars that we do. We do it once a month, and we try to do it on topics that really resonate with folks and to really dive in from a different perspective. So, for instance, we have it today. It's at 7 p.m. and it's going to be focused on like food and nutrition, but from a cultural lens. So, for instance, because I said I'm Nigerian, I eat a lot of tomatoes, but tomatoes also have the ability to increase your heartburn and you're stressful. So having those types of conversations would be like, you go to the doctors and they say, oh yeah, these are all the things you can't eat. And it's like 90% of the food I eat. I'm like, yeah, that's not right. So let's find a way to make it more balanced. So trying to have those conversations. So that's what we do on the once a month, Melanin Mondays. Next month,
love that.
Infertility. So I'm quite
amazing
excited as well.
And how can someone sign up for it?
Yeah, go to our website or follow me on LinkedIn. Either way, you'll definitely learn about it, and then you'll be able to see like when we have it and whatever topics is interested. And if you want to learn more about a topic and you want to learn it from a specific perspective, then DM me and I'll find a speaker for that. So for instance, I know that I've had a lot of people talk to me about fibroids, so I'm going to try to find two different perspectives on how we can tackle fibroids. One, diagnosing it, and then two, living with it.
Very cool. And what was the thought process behind starting this?
For Melanin Mondays, it was because I kept going to events and would always end up having like these long conversations with people about things that they're frustrated about and they have no idea how to navigate. And so the first one we ever did was navigating healthcare. If you're like new to the country and you don't have a health card. And that was really, really difficult for people. We didn't know like, okay, what's the difference between a CHC, a community health center, versus just like going to a walk-in clinic? How do you navigate that? How do you advocate for yourself? And so just like the fundamental basics, the average Canadian did not know. And that was just a conversation that kept happening. So I just said, okay, you know what, let me just throw some together and see how it works. And it did pretty good. And so I decided to keep doing it.
Amazing. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I honestly wish I could attend today's session on food because I'll
record it for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to watch it because I go back and forth on that a lot. Because it's the same thing. Like there's so much cultural nuance to food, and that isn't currently aligning with what is good for you.
Yeah.
And so, for example, a lot of Indian food is very high carb, has been for the longest time. And we don't, we don't really get too much exercise with the diabetes capital of the world, all the fun stuff. We're leading not in a good way. So there was a point where I was morbidly obese and sort of cleaned up my act, and I was like, yeah, it means I have to eat more protein, which I love eating protein, no problems there, but it kind of makes me a little annoyed that there's a generic sort of one template diet plan that seems to be, hey, yeah, eat your chicken breast and get your veggies and get the 1/3 carbs
With
and
no taste and no spice.
yeah. Like I love biryani. I would like to
Like throw that in the mix, please.
yeah. Like I want to stay fit, but I also want to eat biryani a couple of times a week. That would be ideal.
That's for me, personally. I actually had a meeting with the dietitian, I think 2 years ago, and they were walking me through their plan, and I'm like, if plantain is not included in your plan, I will not be taking it. So find a way to include plantain inside your plan. It does not take a lot, but I need to have it at least every day.
A little bit. Yeah, for sure. And so that's where I feel a little conflicted because, yes, since I switched to this, yes, it is working well for me. And I have lost weight, my blood markers, everything's better than it's ever been. But also, there's thousands of years of history of eating a certain type of food. And within the last 10 years, that has changed. Like, it doesn't quite sit right with me. That's what I grapple with.
No, honestly, I have the same thoughts. I think when we think of nutrition and food, you seeing all these different documentaries, there's a lot of incentives as to what we're learning about, even in general, like the proportion of saying, oh, you must have milk. Like I remember seeing this thing, you must have cow's milk specifically.
Right.
Like growing up, you see the thing, oh, it's so good for you, healthy bones, and you have it in your cereal every day, and cereal is just pure sugar. And so you're just hearing all these different commercials and saying this is what I'm supposed to do, right? But there's motives behind each of those things. And I think while we're slowly starting to have the conversation and trying to do more research into different avenues, it's more of what works for you individually and personalized, and then integrating it in a culture that still works. Because having like just small vegetables and some small rice and chicken breast every day is never going to work for me. But you have to have a balance. So I see that when you have a lot of folks that have different dietary restrictions. So for instance, one of my sisters is vegan and the other is pescatarian. The vegan is honestly a chef. Like I really want her to go to culinary school for a long time. I've like accepted that she like is a policy, and I'm just like, I've accepted this for her. But she's such a great cook. And when she came, she was like teaching us all these different recipes and saying how, we're going to have tofu this and tofu that. And I said, no, of course, very strict. And then she would like force feed it to me. And I'm like, okay, this is good. I'll try to pretend like I'm not really loving it. But the way that she was able to do it is because she's still...
It's devastating when they're right, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's very frustrating. I had to like hold my face and be like, yeah, this really sucks. But it was fantastic. And you're just kind of experimenting. So there's this thing called suya. It's like it's, I think traditionally been like beef or chicken, and it's kind of like a peanut spice, truthfully. And like this peanut sauce or different things you can do. Sometimes people use like sauce, some people use like tomatoes and onions and things like that. So my sister made suya tofu and suya shrimp, and I did not know what to expect at all, to be honest. But it was so good that like it was finished within like an hour, and we're like spending the rest of the time they were here trying to convince them to make more. And it was one of those things to say like, oh, tofu is one of those things that I would have naturally walked past and said like, why do I need to eat this? Like, what, this is not going to taste good. But because they've been forced to integrate it to my food, I'm starting to see, oh, I can integrate this in a cultural lens. It still tastes fantastic. I just need to put some love into it, and it's great. So it's more about opening our mind into the different perspectives, but then having the people that's teaching us know that how can you present these different healthy options in a way that supports my culture, truthfully.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. Currently, all the recipes that I pick up on Instagram, and they're generally shared by a very shredded very fit white dude. And I mean, some of these recipes are really good, don't get me wrong.
Good.
But I just principally will not watch a recipe where they're trying to teach me how to make a macro-friendly butter chicken. And I'm like, no. But yeah, you're right. If it was a brown person doing it,
you never know.
No, I looked at the recipe. It's if you don't put butter in it, it's not butter chicken. Then it's yogurt chicken, which is not the same.
Not the same thing.
But no, I think, yeah, you're right. I should probably also just give it a shot. But yeah, do you think that would be something Melanin could do on the app, just based on cultural lenses, modify recipes? Because I feel like with AI, that would be relatively easy to do. If you fed it the ingredients.
The recipe piece, it'd probably be more focused on like personalized health, nutrition in that sense. Kind of talking through like naturopaths type of spaces and dietitians and spaces. I think we would probably do that versus like changing the recipes. But it is something that naturally you'd be able to do. I think, again, with like the different AI models, it's all dependent on what it's trained on and like the information it has, right? Like we're seeing this all in one language, really. And we're not seeing it in marginalized languages, which is another big consideration that we start to see. And so there's a lot of history and context that it does not have. If I ask it to make a very traditional dish for me, it would not know what to do. I would very much argue that it would know what to do because it would be based on my tribe. And you say, oh, well, that's niche. I'm like, it's not that niche. It's quite a few million of people. It's just a matter of determining like what model does what information and data sources are integrated in. From Melanin's perspective, it's more of like, how can we support you from a personalized health perspective to advocate so that you can really get better healthcare outcomes? And we probably would do something in that sense.
Amazing. I love that. Yeah, lots to think about. And I didn't think about the language aspect of it. There's literally hundreds of languages that aren't fed into a model.
Yeah.
And they probably don't translate well at all.
Yeah. I have a friend that's specifically working on a startup just in that space. It was more originally for us to learn from marginalized communities and that indigenous languages are dying. And I'm very passionate about that because my tribe used to be most of the continent of Africa, and like those that can speak it is reducing in more and more every year. And
what language is it?
Languages. In Edo State. And so it's not one of the top like languages in Nigeria, even in that. So for me to even find someone to like support me and teach me, it's way more harder. And so when I see startups focusing on that sense and saying, how can we integrate this not just to keep the languages alive, but then also to teach these new technologies and models, all these different languages. We learn a little bit about it in Canadian context from Indigenous folks. So there's lots of Indigenous languages, like, outside of Canada that are also dying. And how can we explore that?
Sure. Wow. Yeah, lots to think about. Lots to think about for sure. Sorry, I'm absorbing.
That's okay.
Very cool. This is more of a general question. There is the last couple of years, the sentiment around Canadian healthcare has been not very positive to put it politely. How do you see that changing in the next couple of years, or do you see that changing at all?
I don't know. If you say the next 4 or 5 years, I don't have as much hope versus the next 15. The only reason why I say that is because I think collectively, like there's a switch now from going from EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, to like inclusion and accessibility or something like that. And in like the forefront, you would think, oh, this is just a terminology change. It's not that important. But the problem is that terminology change leads to a lot of like the research conversations I was talking about before.
Right.
And about how if we're not having enough of the support, then you will not see that in the research. And so then you'll have a decrease in that research. I think in the Canadian sense, there needs to be like a awakening, so to speak. Like, I think when we go to the States, we're like, oh yeah, of course, racism is still very prominent in the US. This is a Canadian perspective. Very prominent in the US, and these are things you see. But in Canada, everything's so fancy and everything's so great. And I'm like, no, everyone, like, it's really not that way. You just need to, you learn which cities not to go to. That's just the truth.
Right.
You learn like microaggression and how to navigate that a little bit more. And everyone's really quiet, which is kind of scary because then when they're quiet about it, you don't know what to prepare and not prepare for. So in the healthcare system in Canada, it's about us being really aware of where we currently are. One, starting off by doing the minimum of collecting the data, like
Right.
Data by race and ethnicities helps us understand the gaps in our own system so that we can better serve those gaps. And
And
also,
what would it take to make that happen? Like, who would we need to talk to, or who's the decision maker?
we need a national like consensus. There's like small pubs of people that think this is important that are talking about it. You see some changes in like Winnipeg, Manitoba. You're seeing some changes in Toronto, U of T. You're seeing small peeps of people say this is important. We need to work on it. But we're not having that national thing. Like Stats Canada needs to like incorporate this inside their collection process and their things. And this only happens every few years. So it's like
Right.
we need to really lobby together and say, okay, this is something that needs to take place and we need to adjust how we're doing it because we won't be able to see which disorders we should invest in to be able to support more. Like we need this research and innovation to be able to get a little bit further. And so that's part of it. And then from the patient standpoint, we have to think how we have a shortage of doctors and our healthcare system right now is reliant on walk-in doctors and family
Right.
clinics. We're not prepared for the boomer bust, so to speak, that's going to happen in a few years. And we have a collective mindset that healthcare is free when in actuality it's not. It's free until it's not. And so there's quite a few changes that need to take place. So in 20 years, 15 years, I'm quite hopeful. In 4 or 5, it's like, let's just open our eyes a little bit more and let's support where possible.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. What I'm hearing is I should be tweeting at Stats Canada every day saying, yo,
please, if it's possible, make the change. Yeah.
Yeah, I say this with my 50 Twitter followers as if, yeah, I'm big on Twitter. Yeah, no, I mean, you never know. Like, someone might see it, and sometimes social media does tend to work. Not to say that there isn't, this can replace the work that will go into it. But, I was thinking about what you said about people being very quiet and how in this, I think Canada has incredible PR globally. Like, I think they've done an incredible job completely wiping out their history of wiping out the indigenous people. And, just being like, hey, we're the nice people, but some of the most passive aggressive people I've met.
Yeah.
And not to say that there aren't good people here. I think the pros far outweigh the cons, but there is definitely a lot of optimizing for being nice versus being effective. And yeah, so when I actually moved to Canada, this is completely unrelated to healthcare, but my first job, my first feedback session, my manager told me, hey, you're doing all these things. It's great. Blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, oh, I've been crushing it. I came out feeling great. I'm like, I am clearly I've been the best thing that's happened to this company since ever. And then when it came to document this review, I was like, yo, this has like what happened? And then I learned about the sandwich method.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is terrible because I don't know what to work on. I just like you sandwiched one line of action item between 20 minutes of telling me how good I am.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to figure that out. Where now I literally sit with a pen going, okay, but tell me more.
Yeah.
What is the gap?
Yeah.
So it's,
which I'm not a huge fan of that methodology.
I hate
I'm
it.
really not. I think we start to see that more because a lot of managers were like amazing individual in the company, and they're not like given like here's a leadership training to go and do this thing so you can be fantastic as a manager because your role is switching. You're not becoming a people manager. That's typically what it is. And so when you're doing that, trying to provide feedback is one of those things that changes. One, based on the person. As individuals, we need to be able to understand how our manager thinks so we can like adjust.
Right.
It's an easier way of doing that versus telling the manager to adjust to 50 people. But that sandwich methodology, I never liked. I'm not a big fan. It's like I'm trying to find that one, like, okay, but what's the problem?
Yeah.
To get to it.
Yeah, and make like clear differences between these are the things that are working well, these are the things we need to work on. Like it's not rocket science, it's not controversial. Most of the world operates that way on feedback, so I don't know, which I've been trying to do with my team. I'm like, hey, look, these are the things that went well, but these are the things we need to work on. And
yeah, absolutely.
I think the first couple of sessions were a little bit like, oh, okay,
yeah,
I guess that's how we're doing it now.
I did this methodology that I think helps sometimes. I tell people to recap everything that they've done in the past X period of time and then split it up between what you think you should start doing, stop doing, continue, and then what you recognize. And usually the recognize is the real lesson learned, and that's where the real change is. And so that you've already walked through all the things you realize, hey, this is a problem. I'll add my own version to it. And then say, these are things you're doing great. These are things I think you should stop doing. These are things I think you should continue. And these are things I recognize. And then by the time you get to that recognize point, both of us would have walked away with an understanding as to how to do better for the next quarter or the next 6 months or whatever, depending on how you do it.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. In your journey of building Melanin, what is something you didn't anticipate to happen at all, but it did? One good, one bad.
One good, one bad. I would say there's one particular pitch competition that I wasn't expecting to win, but also it's the day that it happened. It was like, I had two of my close friends come down for my birthday, and they kind of had like a day in the life as an entrepreneur. And we had like gone through all these different things, went to one space to work, working all day, and ended up having like quite a few rejections throughout the day. So I'm kind of going to space being not sure, and I was not prepared. I just kind of ran. And then we got to Toronto. It was raining. And so I'm running from the rain to the stage. So like literally I have like 5 minutes left to prepare. And I'm like huffing and puffing, and I'm like, okay. And then I just speak, not wearing any of the things I thought I was going to wear. I thought I was going to wear this huge suit. I was going to have my own makeup done. I was just like, yeah, I'm just running from one thing to the other, trying to get it done. And then I won. And so that one was probably the most surprising because you could see the shock in my face, like the shock throughout the whole experience. I
love that.
Being there. So that one was probably the best. What I wasn't anticipating, I think there's two parts. I wasn't anticipating the complexity of, because I'm running a healthcare startup, the changes that I have to do versus running any other type of startup. So like you're in a lot of programs that are general based for like supporting you as an entrepreneur, as a founder, but a lot of it's not as applicable when you're in very regulated fields. And so like, for instance, trying to get insurance took like 3 months of like pure stress because I wasn't going to the right places. And because when you're running a health tech startup, it's like a lot more risk. And so the cost is easily 10 times, like probably more. I think I was 15 times more than what my other friend was paying. And so that cost and something like that was a big change. And then also trying to understand that as you're building this, you have to be chummy and friendly with folks, but you still also understand like this is a professional environment. So as you're building, you have to act as if, well, it's your day job, so to speak, but you have you have to navigate it differently, right? You always have to be observant of the folks that can help lift you where you're going and the folks that are kind of just like there and will kind of drag on. It's kind of like the things with sales that people say they love dealing with other countries and not Canada, because Canada will say, that's nice, maybe, right? They won't say no. They won't say a hard no. It's kind of the same with entrepreneurship, is you have to be able to discern, when is this a hard no or not? And so, because everyone was trying to be smart, no one is ever going to say completely write you off. It's never what the future holds. So at least that's not smart for them to do. And so you really want to make sure that you're able to prioritize your time accordingly by discerning what is a hard no, what is actually a yes or a maybe that can lead to this yes, and what energy am I putting into both circumstances.
Wow, that's very interesting. And what would your advice be to someone who's like you, has a full-time day job that they're working and want to take a stab at entrepreneurship and build something of their own, but are trying to figure out how to get started?
Yeah. Live and breathe by your calendar. That's one. Your time is so important. And it is very hard when you're working full-time and also running a startup to balance both. You learn to prioritize, like please prioritize not the metrics that sounds good. Like I only started properly, like I posted on LinkedIn on and off for a while, for a few years. It's only this year that I'm like, okay, I'm going to take it seriously. But it was because it was a metric that, while sounded nice, it wasn't helping move the needle at the stage in which I was in. Right now, I'm at the stage where this could actually help move the needle. So it's a matter of determining, okay, what's the metrics that are actually going to move the needle versus the metrics that sounds good. It sounds cool to be going to every single conference. It's also very expensive, but it is not something that, is necessarily going to increase your revenue, increase your users, increase your traction. And so having like a goal behind each thing that you're doing is very helpful. And the last thing would be is that give yourself grace. It's going to be really hard to do everything at once. And as long as you are 1% better than the day before, the week before, then you are moving. And that's all that matters. It's kind of like the Nike slogan.
I love that. That's awesome. I have one last question, and this is probably the most important thing anyone's ever asked you in your life. What is your go-to hype song?
Like, go-to hype song? Oh no, this is so stressful.
You know, it's funny. This question, everyone I've had on the show, this is the question that trips everyone up.
Yeah, I was
It's
not.
not everything else.
I was not expecting this. I'm looking at this being like, okay, what's appropriate?
Whatever gets you hyped up.
Oh my
There's no
God.
politically correct answer here.
Oh my
It's
God.
what gets you going.
Okay. Let me pull this and see if I can. Okay, so it's a show called Stars. That's like the star cast. And Kiki Palmer. I'm trying to make sure. Kiki Palmer Bossy.
Kiki Palmer Bossy. Okay,
Yeah.
I will
But the
check it
star
out.
cast. Whenever I'm like, I have to go to the gym. It's 5 a.m. I'm tired. I'll just play it and then I'll immediately change clothes and just enter my car.
Love it. You go to work out at 5 a.m.?
I have to leave my house at 5 a.m. to get to. No, I have to get ready at 5 a.m. to leave my house by 5:30 to get to the gym for 6. Yeah.
That's awesome. I
It's
also go in the morning, but mine is in my building, so I have to take an elevator up. So I usually do spend. It still takes me 30 minutes just to psych myself out.
Yeah, sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need it.
Amazing. Yvonne, thank you so much for your time. I learned a lot out of this conversation. I think I always tell people that for me, anyone, if there's more than 4 listeners to an episode, it's great, which is usually me, my mom, my fiance, and the guest. And anything beyond that is a bonus. Off late, we've been actually hitting pretty decent numbers.
That's good.
So I think there's, whoever listens to this episode, there's a lot of value to be gained just from listening to you. I think what you're building is honestly incredible. We need more of this out in the world, and we need more business success stories coming out of Canada. I'm very, very excited. I wish you all the best. I think it's going to be awesome. And when Melanin is a massive success, I'll keep using this episode saying, I interviewed her first. I spotted it. I spotted it early on. Yeah, this is all a long-term investment. This is
There's some type of motive behind it. I see.
always, always. Did you think I was doing this out of the goodness of my heart?
I mean,
Not at
come
all.
on.
Honestly, like I love the mission. I love what you're doing, and I'm happy to support any which way that I can. And we will be following your journey along with a lot of interest.
Thank you, thank you. If folks want to learn a little bit more, we are launching our beta on February 24th. So
Okay.
I'm quite excited. I'm like pushing my team. They're getting stressed, but they're gonna be fine. And we're all excited to make sure that it's gonna be fantastic. So yeah, please make sure to check us out at melanin.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
And